Let's talk about Biker Build-Off. I was there for about a half a dozen of them. I was there at the very beginning. I'm gonna tell you a few things about Biker Build-Off that I know for a fact that you can't possibly know. The first episode of the Biker Build-Off series is actually the episode from 2003 with myself and Dave Perewitz from Bridgewater, Massachusetts. Now, the very first Biker Build-Off we filmed was called The Great Biker Build-Off, and that was myself and Roger Bourget, which was filmed in 2002. And go back and take a look at my video about that episode. It's a really good in-depth look about that episode. But that was a one-off. That wasn't part of the series. Discovery Channel, from the success of the Great Biker Build-Off between me and Roger Bourget, decided to make a series out of it. So actually the first episode of the series was this one that I'm going to talk to you about with Dave Perewitz. Hey Dave, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about the Biker Build-Off that we did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know it. Time flies, huh, Bill? Well, you know, the Biker Build-Offs, Billy, were just an awesome experience. Especially the first one that you and I did together. My God, we had such a good time. You know, from the day we got down there to Pensacola, you know, until we got to Dallas, it was just a great time.
The Great Biker Build-Off that I did with Roger Bourget aired in 2002 and was so successful, along with the success of Motorcycle Mania, that Discovery Channel decided to make a series from that show.
The first Biker Build-Off was huge. I mean, in the motorcycle world, man, it was like, you know, something new and innovative that, you know, everybody was excited about.
And the first Biker Build-Off aired on the same night as a one-off of American Chopper. Those two shows aired back to back, and the success of both shows at that time launched both shows to become their own series. American Chopper was based on the Tuttles from Orange County Choppers, and then Biker Build-Off was really based around a bunch of different builders, myself being included in that group. So Dave Perewitz was a legend in the motorcycle industry when I got into it. I mean, I knew who he was. I'd seen his work in the magazines, you know, long before TV and the internet. We had magazines, and I'd followed his work along with other guys like Sugar Bear and Arlen Fatland and Donnie Smith and, you know, Arlen Ness. For a guy like you, who had a ton of magazine, you know, you were all over all the magazines. I knew of you through the magazines for years. But for a guy like you to get that kind of recognition on TV was a big deal, because a lot of the guys from your era did not. I mean, there's so many names. I could go over a laundry list of names of people who deserved to be on that show, I think, and even longer list of people who didn't deserve that were on it, but including maybe even me. But I think it was a big deal that, you know, you got it, Arlen Ness got it, because I can tell you from being a guy who started building bikes in the late 80s that it was Donnie Smith, Arlen Ness, Dave Perewitz, Sugar Bear, you know, Denver Mullins. You guys are the guys that I grew up looking at your stuff and saying, that's what I want to do. So I think it was a big deal that they at least included a few of you, and it was a shame that they didn't include a lot of guys that were, you know, maybe 10, 15 years older than me.
Which is kind of sad for some of the guys that didn't get picked, like Donnie Smith. You know, Donnie certainly deserved it. And you know, Alan got in it a little later, which, you know, originally Alan, you know, I talked to Alan about it, and he didn't seem too interested. But then, you know, as time went on and the hype built, and I mean, man, everybody looked forward to watching Biker Build-Off.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, I think it was on Monday nights or Tuesday nights, and I mean, man, it was like you were going to be home to watch Biker Build-Off.
Right. I mean, there's just so many builders whose work I really, really admired. Indian Larry and Ron Sims. There was so many builders that I admired, and Perewitz was at the top of that list. And when we decided to make Biker Build-Off and sat down and came up with a list of names of builders who would potentially be great for it. Perewitz was on that list. I mean, he was somebody that I knew. He was somebody whose work I knew well enough to know that he would be a dynamite addition to the series. Perewitz's main course has always been as a painter, but the guy fabricated some amazing bikes. There's some bikes that he did that in the 70s and 80s in that digger style that I was just wild about. I can't even tell you how much I love these bikes. And so to be able to do a build-off with a guy like that was a big step up for a guy like me, because at the time I was fairly well known in the bike industry, but I was nowhere on his level. I wasn't on the level of Arlen Ness or any of those guys. I mean, I was a few rungs down the ladder from those guys and trying to climb my way up to them. But I was a big fan of Dave's work. I was inspired by his work and his success, and I knew this is what I was going to do for a living for the rest of my life. So I watched guys like him and guys of his era, which were preceded me by a few years, and watched their success and modeled my career after what those guys were doing. I looked at all of them and said, I'm going to pick that piece from Perewitz, and that piece from Arlen Ness, and that piece from Sugar Bear, and that piece from Mondo, and I'm going to take those little pieces of each of their success and make that my success.
Last, Billy gets his awesome steed on the road. Damn. The bike he's created has classic chopper lines in that it has a high neck and an angular profile. It's called a ridge.
At the time that we started filming this biker build-off in February of 2003, Dave Perewitz had been building custom bikes and painting for as long as I have now, 20 years later. So I'm 35 years in the industry now. In 2023, 20 years ago, Dave already had that many years under his belt. So, you know, he's 55 years in the industry now. Quite a bit more experience than me. And because of that experience, and because of his success, and because of everybody that I admired, that I knew Dave knew when he was in that circle, and those were his peers, I was very intimidated to do this build-off with Dave, because I knew he was on a whole other level that I was not on. I mean, I knew if you give me a shot to get in the ring with him, I'm going to go, because I'm a fighter and I'm going to see what I can do. But I knew that I was getting into the ring with a lion, and it was hard to do, but I did it.
You know, and same thing, Billy. I mean, I wasn't about to, you know, change the way that we were. That was it. You know, this is the biker world. This is what we do, and this is how we act.
I got to tell you, I was a huge fan of your work for a lot of years, and when Hugh told me we were going to be doing the build-off with you, I was, I mean, over the moon, because I first of all, I was intimidated because I'd seen your work, you know, over the years in magazines. I'd seen it up close, and I was, I'm like, I know how good you are. You know, I know how good you are and how refined what you do is. And in 2003, I was still learning my way. So I was very intimidated. Even though we had done really well in the build-off with Roger Bourget, he got thrown to the wolves. You know, they took him to an event that was like kind of my crowd, my people. So I was really intimidated. I mean, what did you think about, I mean, because I'm sure you had an idea of who I might have been, you know, even though we kind of had met in the past, but what did you think about when they said you're going to do this with Billy Lane?
Well, you know, Bill, I was thrilled no matter what. You know, I thought it was pretty cool. You know, I mean, we had met before, and I knew what kind of stuff you did, and you did stuff that was totally different than what I did. And, you know, it was all about just the whole thing, you know, being able to build a bike, being able to go back and forth between you and I, being able to go halfway around the country and ride for 3 or 4 days. You know, it wasn't about winning or losing, really.
So the timing of this biker build-off was really horrible for me. It was just not a good time for me. So a lot was happening for me in early 2003. Let me run those things down for you real quick. So we filmed the show in February, March, April of 2003. That's right around Daytona Bike Week. So realize the year before, I had filmed the first biker build-off, and it aired on the Discovery Channel, was wildly popular. Motorcycle Mania had already put a whole bunch of momentum into the bike industry, and then the American Chopper show had aired. So all of a sudden there was this monster interest in custom motorcycles and builders. Jesse, the Tuttles, myself. I mean, we were the guys early on in the Discovery Channel TV thing that everybody was looking at. So by the time this show came around in 2003, you know, people were crawling all over my shop, wanting to get custom bikes built, wanting to know when we're going to make another TV show. So all that was going on. I had decided to move from the shop that we filmed the Bourget Biker Build-Off in, which was right next door to a bigger building. I needed more space, so I moved my shop. So at the time that we were doing Daytona Bike Week, we were also moving my shop. So if you watch the Perewitz episode, you'll see that we were actually moving into that shop as we were filming the show. You'll look around in the background, you'll see there's workers in there. They're hanging lighting and doing electrical work for us, and we were moving our workbenches in and our tool carts in and all our equipment in. And so there's a lot of difficulties in filming at this time. And that's just the first thing I'm going to tell you about, was moving into that shop. Something else that had happened was I had been picked in late 2002 to build a custom motorcycle for the Camel Roadhouse, which before Biker Build-Off came along and Motorcycle Mania came along was like the biggest thing in the bike industry that you could do to get recognized as a builder. And RJ Reynolds and Camel had picked me to build a bike for it. And when I got chosen to do this, I decided I am going to build them a monster of a motorcycle. And I built what I call the money shot, which to me is probably the best custom motorcycle I've ever built. If it's not the best, it's definitely my favorite. If I can have any of my custom bikes back, that would be at the very top of the list. Really, really proud of that bike. A lot of people recognize that bike. Camel bike was a big deal. This is Biker Zone magazine from Spain. Got the Camel bike on the cover. It was on the cover of almost every motorcycle magazine you could think of. You know, it was so different. It was so wild. I'm going to do a video about the Camel bike, about the money shot. I don't have the motorcycle anymore, but I have a ton of photos, some video, and a lot of magazine articles about the bike. But I can just tell you how popular this bike was. It was really in-depth. It was a lot of work. It was something I never could have done on Biker Build-Off. And so getting that bike done in the midst of trying to film a Biker Build-Off made things immensely difficult. And so I had to get that bike done for Daytona Bike Week, which came after the beginning of filming. So I was filming a show, I was moving my shop. We had the momentum from the first Biker Build-Off, and now I'm building the Camel bike and getting that done for Bike Week. And if that isn't enough to make matters worse, one of my best friends in the world, almost like a brother to me, my friend Georgie, got murdered Super Bowl weekend, which is in February. While all this was going on. And, you know, I was already trying to grieve the loss of my really, really good friend and be ready for Bike Week, film a Biker Build-Off, move my business. I just had so many things going on at one time. It was kind of the perfect storm for me to screw up, and I did. And in 2003, besides everything else that was going on, I was also writing this book, Chop Fiction, for a guy like me who was a motorcycle mechanic, and then I became a parts manufacturer and a custom bike builder. You know, these kind of opportunities to be on TV and to have a publisher ask you to write a book about your work and your life, those kind of opportunities don't come along a whole lot. And I knew when I had the opportunity to do all these things, I had to take them. They kind of all came at once. But I was writing this in 2003, and there's a bunch of stuff in Chop Fiction about the Biker Build-Off with Bourget, and the one I'm talking to you about now with Dave Perewitz. There's a good shot in Chop Fiction of Jesse Finney, the cameraman, in the back of a pickup truck shooting Dave and I on the highway. Some more good stuff in Chop Fiction. Michael Lichter photos of me arriving in Shreveport on the road with Dave. There's Jesse again filming us somewhere. Myself and Dave and Nick out on the highway. One of those seat cooling stops. And also the 2003 Indian Larry Biker Build-Off that happened in August 2003, which I am making a video about, so keep your eyes posted for that later this summer. But I was writing shop fiction, and that was also something that was on my plate at that time. So all that being said, I wasn't focused, I was messy, I was in no condition to be doing a build-off with Dave Perewitz. I just already knew that he was on a different level. I'd seen his work and seen how impeccable his work was, and mine wasn't as evolved at that time. So I had to go outside my comfort zone to build something that I knew would be really, really special. I mean, the first biker build-off bike I did with Roger Bourget was a straight traditional chopper. Yeah, it had a lot of chrome plating and flashy paint on it. The lines of that bike were very traditional, very David Mann art looking. So building something for the Perewitz build-off I knew had to be different. So I've been working on this down and dirty frame for a while. Something that was long and stretched out, but not traditional lines, and that's what that frame was. And I knew I'd have to make a different gas tank, and I'd been thinking about the exhaust design that I used on this bike for a while. So I knew I had to come in hot and heavy, and that's what I did. When we started doing Biker Build-Off, you know, there was a lot of people that they were talking about making shows with. We'd be filming a show, and they'd be say, hey, we want to do a show after this one with this guy or that guy. And I was really trying to help steer production into the direction of some of the builders that I wanted. So if you look at this particular Biker Build-Off with Dave Perewitz, I had some people in there working with me that I really wanted to see on the show. One of them was Aaron Green from Paramount Custom Cycles. I didn't even know Aaron that long at this time, but the guy's work was incredible. The bikes that these guys were doing in Reno were just otherworldly, and Aaron was young like I was at the time and a newcomer virtually to the industry, and was just doing amazing work, and I loved him instantly. We became great friends, and I really, really admired his work, and I wanted to see him on Biker Build-Off. And Biker Build-Off never chose Aaron. And that is one of the biggest heartbreaks for me for Biker Build-Off. And I'm going to give you a little side story. Like one of the things I told you about that you couldn't possibly know about this episode with Dave Perewitz was when I had the seat made for my bike. Paul Cox had been making seats for me for quite a few years at the time. You know, Paul worked in a shop with Larry up in Brooklyn. And I had Paul make the seat for this bike, and he delivered it on the show. But if you notice on the show, he hand-delivered it. And he had Larry with him. And there's a reason they hand-delivered it. They could have just FedExed me that seat. I bought those guys plane tickets and brought them to my shop because I was trying to get those guys, Indian Larry, Gasoline Alley at the time, on Biker Build-Off. And production at Biker Build-Off didn't want to include them in Biker Build-Off, and I couldn't believe it. I found it so hard to believe because Larry was such a huge inspiration to me. Larry was building legendary bikes early on, and original productions had used Larry in one of the Motorcycle Mania episodes with Jesse, so they were already familiar with him. He'd been on TV, and I just couldn't imagine why they didn't want to use Larry when we were doing this build-off, trying to get them to use Larry. And they were saying no. And I said, you have to meet this guy. So I literally called Paul and Larry and said, you guys got to get on a plane and come down here. And you got to meet these guys. And you got to sell yourselves to these guys. Because this, being on one of these shows, will change your life. It will change the course of your business. And frankly, you deserve it. Larry wasn't that into it. Paul wasn't that into it. But they took my advice and did come down. And me giving that advice is probably one of the best things I did in Biker Build Off. And then taking it is definitely one of the best things that happened to Larry, because it changed Larry's life and put Larry's face and his work in front of millions of people who probably would not have been that familiar with it. I mean, Larry was already a monster in the magazines. His bikes were amazing. But getting on Biker Build Off changes things for a guy like me and a guy like Larry as a builder. So I just want to let you know about that, that's why those guys were there, and nobody could dispute this because it's a fact. And Discovery did, in fact, do the next episode of Biker Build Off with Indy and Larry and used him against Paul Yaffe. And that was a great episode and a great choice by Discovery. And I'm glad it happened, because that led to Indy and Larry and Billy Lane, July, August 2003, 20 years ago. Look for that later this summer. So there's a couple things that everybody remembers from the Biker Build Off with Perewitz. Let me go over those with you, because those are the things that kind of stand out about the show. But I was definitely running behind. Dave was very meticulous in the way he builds his bikes, and I was a little sloppy, to be quite honest with you. And Dave would measure everything, and I didn't really measure anything. I did a lot of stuff by eye. These days I measure, but because I've evolved and I learned from guys like Dave, if you want to be that good, you gotta measure and make everything perfect. But back then I was just kind of doing everything by eye. We were trying to do it as fast as we could to get it done. And so Dave was teasing us with the tape measure, and of course there's a famous thing where we filmed Nick slamming the tape measure with a sledgehammer and then sending it back to Dave. That was a great joke, but it showed me right away, because I didn't know him that well at the time. It showed me Dave's sense of humor and then how lightheartedly he was taking this. And I learned a lot about that from Dave, how not to take this so seriously. Even though I was stressed out and under a lot of pressure, I learned, okay, he's not taking it that seriously. He's established, he's confident. And I learned later on that that's how I needed to be in Biker Build Off. And you'll see as those episodes progress, I got more and more relaxed, was taking it a lot easier on myself. I was cutting the sheet metal. Everybody remembers the scene where I smashed the bandsaw with the sledgehammer. I wasn't doing that for the effect of it being on TV. I was literally that pissed off at the thing. I was that frustrated, and it's just something that came to me. I used to have a really bad temper, and smashing that thing actually made me feel a lot better, cleared my head, and allowed me to move forward in a whole different direction. Joe Richardson had been painting my bikes for me for a lot of years, and I always, on my bikes, I let the metal do the talking and the lines do the talking and didn't paint. And this is the one area where I felt like I had an advantage over Dave. I know Dave's a painter. And Dave speaks to you through his paint. And he's a legendary painter. If you watch those sequences, I mean, he truly put on a master class in painting flames. I mean, go back and watch that episode. Dave put on a master class in taping and painting flames. There's not, I don't think, anybody that does flames better than him. They call Dave the King of Flames. Truly amazing what he did with the flames on that bike he built against me. I mean, I wish I could have had a flame job like that on my bike. I knew that Joe didn't paint that way, so I decided to say to Joe, you do what you want to do. I want it to be blue. Because I already done a red bike. Black, I didn't think would do very well on TV because you realize there's a camera rolling. Kind of one of my favorite colors for a bike is blue, so I said, I don't really care what you do, but just paint it blue. But do your thing, and I'll be happy because I know he does beautiful work. So I go to check on the progress of the bike, and it's traffic cone orange. I would never go to a painter and say, please paint this orange for me. There's a couple colors I would not choose. You guys might want to get the Kleenex out for this. I don't want to break anybody's hearts, but I wouldn't paint one purple. I wouldn't paint one orange. I wouldn't paint one pink. Just personal preference. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with those colors, but I would not pick orange. So when I went in and saw the orange, I was mortified. It's probably the best way to describe it. I mean, it really, really upset me because I didn't want to ride it. I didn't want to be seen on an orange bike. And I didn't think that that color would play out well with the design I was working on for the bike. Joe did a beautiful paint job, and I mean, it was really masterfully done and made the metalwork that I did just really pop. But I was honestly this close to getting out some 600 sandpaper, scuffing that paint down, and rattle canning it flat black, because I really did not like the orange paint. Even though the work was beautifully done, I didn't want the color. And I was gonna do it. It was that close, but I didn't want to be disrespectful to Joe. And I didn't want to be disrespectful to Dave, because I realized Dave is a painter. And for me to show up with a rattle can bike is like saying to you, I don't respect paint. And I thought it would be a distasteful move. So even in my messy state that I was in at that time, I had the wisdom to make that call the right way. And in the end, I think the bike looked great on TV. There's a scene in the show, I had to make some last minute side steps because I hadn't thought this through. I hadn't planned this out. I was kind of building this bike as I went. But I had no place to put the battery. I had to put the battery up under the transmission in the bike. And in order to do it, I was either going to have to turn the bike upside down or jack it up. So I used a motorcycle strap and a winch, and I jacked the bike up from a boom in my shop. And that's how I was able to get underneath of it and finish all the electrical work. But that was a last minute thing I had to figure out. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was almost ready to give up on the bike at that point. There was quite a few times during the build where I was really, really kind of ready to give up. And there's a scene in, I saw one of the rough edits of the show. They had this scene in there, and Hugh King had given me an ultimatum, and I don't like ultimatums, and I didn't do well with it. I'd been running late, and he was telling me, if you don't get this thing done, these guys are waiting for you in Pensacola. If you don't get this thing done, we're gonna call Dave the winner. And I was kind of like, go ahead and call Dave the winner. What do I care? But I really wanted to ride with him. I really wanted to do the show with him. So I'm like, look, I'm going to go work. I'm going to work as hard as I can. I'm going to work through the night. I'm going to try to get this thing done. I was lucky I had Aaron Green there. I had Big John there to help me. These guys stayed and helped me work through the night, early morning hours, whatever I needed. I mean, true brothers came in and helped me get this job done. And I ended up editing that out of the show for the final cut. But I have a photo of that moment. And there's a little sequence in the show that was right after that ultimatum was given to me. And I was ready to throw in a towel. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to finish this hunk of metal, and I'm going to ride it to Dallas. Dave and his crew decided not to wait for me in Pensacola, which was the right move. There was no reason for them to all sit there.
We decided to, continue on, and we stopped right outside of Church Point, Louisiana. I forget what city it was in, but it was close to Mike Guidry's. And Mike, being an old friend of mine, he decided to throw a big bash, and so he sent the local police over to our hotel, and he gave us a police escort over to his place. And so we got there, and he had all the Cajun food, he had a Cajun band, And then I remember you rode in.
I wanted to be on time for Dave, but I wasn't able to be. Dave was super cool about it. He was super patient, and he realized that this was a great opportunity and wasn't going to blow it over me being a day late. It's funny, Dave's daughter, Jody, said something in the show. Maybe Billy thought it was tomorrow, which I thought was really comical because, you know, if they'd given me an extra week, I would have took it. So Dave and his crew rode from Pensacola, Florida to Mike Guidry's place in Louisiana, and they had a party set up there. Those guys kind of hung out and waited for me to get there. So, you know, instead of us riding during the day, we ended up riding all night to get there. And I didn't get there. I don't think it was probably till 11 o'clock, about midnight, that I arrived at Guidry's place, and I was wore out. But got there. Dave was super cool. His whole posse was cool. I mean, everybody was great. They had a bunch of Cajun food and, you know, nice cold beer after a long, long, long day and a half of riding to get there. And, you know, it was just a really, really good experience. And that's at the point in biker build-off that you know, okay, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. That's the point in biker build-off that you know, okay, this is where the real fun begins and all the shop drama ends. This is what you put all this work into it for. Like, what a moment, you know. So when I arrived at Guidry's, I knew right away it was going to be fun. And I was having a hard time with the bike handling, you know, the last few miles of that trip. And then I found out, and Dave reminded me.
Bolt off your springer maybe on the rocker or something?
Yeah, that's what it was. Right, exactly. You got a good memory.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And the thing was handling funny. I didn't know because we were riding in the rain. I thought it was just the rain.
Yeah.
And then we found out when we parked, I went to park it, and it was feeling funny. And, God, I can't remember that. I found out that night that I had my fork Springer front end had a stud that holds the rockers that hold the axle. One of those studs, the nut had come off. The nut had come off the stud, and the stud was vibrating out. And the whole rocker was getting ready to flop off the bike. I would have lost control of that bike and probably wrecked into a ditch on the side of the interstate going 80 miles an hour if I had rode a few more miles. So I was really lucky to catch that. Worked a couple hours at night to, you know, find a nut that we could use to put on the bike. Got that fixed and was ready to ride the next morning. We left the next morning for the ride. It was really foggy. Jesse Finney, the cameraman, caught some amazing imagery on that ride like he always did. And I want to talk a second about some of the things I told you that you couldn't possibly know. So there's a bunch of riding footage where we were going on I-10 over the bayou. The interstate's elevated way above the bayou. It's a divided highway, so you know there's two separate bridges, one going eastbound, one going westbound. And this is before civilian drones, so they were filming us with a helicopter. So Dave and I would be riding on the interstate, and the helicopter would fly in and drop below the level of the road, but above the water level, and then rise up and get these beautiful shots. And Jesse Finney's hanging out the side of this helicopter with a camera, shooting these amazing shots of us. I mean, those shots are just epic. And the Highway Patrol had shut down I-10 for us so we could do this. I mean, I-10's a busy interstate, but this is how big biker build-off was, is they shut down I-10 for us. We'd ride across the bridge, we'd get off at the next exit, turn around, ride back across the bridge again, and shot the sequence for probably, I don't know, about 20, 30 minutes, maybe longer than that. But you know, Dave and I talk about it, remember that. So
yeah, I remember that. That was the morning I think we did the helicopter shoot.
yeah, on I-10. Remember that rotor wash blowing us all over the road? And I remember filming that like it was yesterday, and it almost like wanting to pinch myself. It didn't even seem real to be riding with you on this build-off. It was a whole different thing for me to be, you know, there next to you, kind of in a way on your level. You know, even though I knew I wasn't, it sure kind of felt that way in a way, and it was surreal for me to do that ride with you.
Well, you know, Bill, I mean, we both loved motorcycles. We got a chance to ride halfway around the country together.
Yeah.
That's all you know what I mean?
But those shots were just so amazing. I mean, I remember riding and looking over at David and saying to myself, I'm riding next to Dave Perewitz, filming a TV show, already knowing how successful the first biker build-off was. And, you know, I got a helicopter pilot doing this crazy flying. And, you know, he would come up above that highway, and it's, you know, you can't hear the helicopter when it's below you. You know, all the noise is below. And the motorcycles are loud. And then the wind. And then all of a sudden, the helicopter would come up, and that rotor wash would just blast us. And he'd get up higher, and he'd start to pitch that helicopter sideways in front of us. I mean, it's just really, really surreal. I remember it like it was yesterday, but it was 20 years ago. So after we left Guidry's place in Louisiana, you know, it was me and Perewitz and our crew. We're headed to Dallas. This is a 720-mile trip from Pensacola to Dallas, so a good long ride. One of the great things that made Biker Build-Off great was that we actually rode these bikes a really long distance. So you couldn't build a show bike that, you know, was a trailer queen. You had to build a bike that you could actually ride. That was one of the things that I loved about Biker Build-Off, was they actually made you prove yourself. Not just that you can make it look good, but you can make it run and operate well. And I love that about it. And I knew Dave's bike was going to run great. I mean, you know, there's no question he's so accomplished. But one of the things you can't know is that a lot of this stuff was shot out of sequence. So we left to go to Dallas. We got caught in a rainstorm, and we're in traffic. And I went to rip a hole shot on the Down and Dirty bike and snapped my drive belt. The rear drive belt, where a chain would run in an older motorcycle, was a Kevlar drive belt, brand new, and snapped that belt. I didn't have a spare, and replacing that belt isn't easy. A chain's easy because you pop the master link out, put the chain on, put the master link back in. But with a belt, to get it on the transmission sprocket, you have to take the rear wheel off the bike, and you have to take the whole primary belt drive off the motorcycle, which takes several hours to do. Change the belt, put it all back together, put the wheel back on it just to get back on the road. We were in Shreveport, Louisiana when that belt broke, and Dave and his crew had already been waiting, and they didn't want to wait any longer, and I didn't blame them, and it was pretty hard to film in the rain anyhow. So those guys all went on to Dallas, and I stayed in Shreveport with my crew of guys, and we had to figure out how to fix it. Been in the bike industry for a decade and a half at that point, knew quite a few people, and some friends hooked me up with Magic Touch Customs in Shreveport, Louisiana, and these people brought us in and treated us like family. And I can't stress enough how great they were, and how I wish the Discovery crew had stayed and filmed what happened there, because that's what bikers and brotherhood and people helping people is all about, and it's really what the essence of Biker Build-Off was all about. And they chose not to stay and film that, which might have been a good thing when I tell you what happened next. But what happened there, those people just brought us in, treated us like family, gave us whatever we needed, had the parts, had the tools and equipment, helped us do the work, and we hung out with them. And you know, you have to realize now, this is maybe 4 hours of work to fix this bike, but it put us a whole nother day behind, because we started drinking beer and whiskey, and we had listening to music and telling stories and had a great time. And they took us in and helped us, and we weren't going to say, okay, thanks, and just split. So we ended up staying there for the whole day, hanging out, having a blast with them. They cooked us Cajun dinner, And just really, really one of the great experiences of that biker build-off that didn't make the screen, but is one of the great things that I remember about it. And it's a little bit about it in Chop Fiction. Those folks were just so good to us, so solid to us. If it wasn't because of Magic Touch Customs in Shreveport, I would have never made it to Dallas. So when you see the riding footage of us riding at night, you'll notice in that footage that was me and Aaron and Big John, and we were all riding. Dave and his crew wasn't in that footage, and the reason is because they had gone on ahead of us. And Discovery ended up editing this stuff in out of sequence. But the ride to Dallas, Dave and I only did part of it together. Then we had to split off because I broke that belt. Those guys went on in the sunshine, and I rode at night, all night in the rain. To Dallas with my guys, but great riding, not complaining, loved it, made for great TV, and something I'll never forget. We pulled into Dallas Friday, April 4th at night, and they had a big party at Rick Fairless Strokers Dallas. Rick throws a Dallas, Texas size party. Everything's oversized. The bar is ridiculous. If you ever go to Dallas and you're into motorcycles, go to Strokers, man. This place is amazing. But we get to Strokers. One of my guys is riding Misbehaving from the first biker build-off, and we are pulling into the bar, and I see over my right shoulder this flash of paint and chrome. He goes to rip a whole shot and loses control of the bike and goes flying right into a concrete wall. He wipes out Misbehaving. But we made a hell of an entrance into that party, and that kind of set the stage for that night. Real wild night in Dallas. The people at Texas have always been awesome to me, and we were so glad to be there, and we got it done. We'd ridden 720 miles. On a rigid frame chopper next to one of the legends who'd inspired me to be here today. Even back then, 20 years ago, I knew it was a magic moment. It was definitely a magical time, and we had figured that out pretty quick, and it was a magic moment. I knew the next day we were going to go to the Dallas Easy Rider show, and I didn't care one bit about that damn trophy, because when you've built the bike and ridden it that far, and you know it's going to come out on TV, you already won. You're already the victor. And so I didn't really care about the judging at all for the show. I didn't care about the trophy. I knew just being on the show was a hands down win. Go back and watch the episode. The Dallas Easy Rider show was a smash. The place was packed. By this point, in the Easy Rider bike shows is where I cut my teeth, where I made my bones, where a lot of people really got to know Billy Lane and Choppers Inc. and my customs. Horse Magazine and Easy Riders Magazine had really, really embraced me. And the Easy Rider bike shows, I was at every Easy Rider bike show. If you guys were around in the early 2000s, I probably met you at one of those shows. You guys were so good to me. I tried to be as good to you as I could possibly be. There's a scene at the end of that show in the judging where they show that Easy Riders sign. That sign was hanging in every arena all over the country. When you went to an Easy Rider show, it was hanging in the middle. It was lit up. And that was how you knew you were at something special, because those shows were amazing. That Easy Rider sign still sit up here 20 years later, high and mighty in my shop. So I was so thrilled to be doing the build-off with Dave. When it became time to cast our ballots at the show for the winner, I did not vote. But I kept my ballot, and 20 years later, I still have my blank ballot from Biker Build-Off, Saturday, April 5th, Dallas, Texas Easy Rider Show. The Great Biker Build-Off, Dallas Easy Riders Bike Show, April 5th, 2003. Billy Lane or Dave Perewitz. I didn't check it. This is pretty cool to be holding a piece of this history from 20 years ago, something that changed my life, changed Dave's life, changed custom motorcycling, to not have voted because I didn't think I deserved to win. I knew Dave's bike was better than mine. I knew he deserved to win. I knew I was late. I didn't even deserve to be there. I wasn't taking it seriously enough. I was messy. My bike was sloppy. But in the end, we made a great TV show, entertained a lot of people, showed a different side of motorcycling. I got that experience with Dave. I had that experience in Shreveport. And doing all this stuff 20 years ago paved the way for my life to be sitting here 20 years later talking to you about it today. So I want to thank you for being here with me, for following me all these years, 35 years in doing this. Thank you for still being here today. I can't let you go without telling you how hot that seat got. I knew it was going to get hot. All that heat under there had to get hot, but I made a heat sink for it, and I was under so much pressure and partying too much at night that I forgot to bring it with me, so I had to ride the whole way without it. And the only thing that saved me was that rain. If it wasn't for the rain, it would have burned me up.